So just for some background for people who are listening, like, I've had this weird hobby. I had the unfortunate position of being thrown in jail for making my investors 5 to 10x, but lying about it, according to the government. A lot of investors would not object, even if you took the story at face value. But I was sitting in prison, and I sort of said, well, I have a unique opportunity here to learn things. And I forgot how much I like learning things, and I got some books, and I started to become like an amateur mathematician. I didn't get that far, by the way, unfortunately. Math is very, very hard. And I respect these guys like a 1,000x more than I used to. And I'm a huge math fan, but like I got nothing on these dudes who do it for a living. And one of the areas I liked was elliptic curves, or number theory, and sort of cryptography in a sense. One of my closest friends put all his money in Bitcoin, and I was like, all right, well, let me try to understand it the way I would understand a biotech. And when I look at a biotech, I really want to like dive in so close to like the point where like I can make the drug myself, and I could like study it myself. And I cultivated that ability over 20 years of studying drugs, but I also know what it's like to start over. And I was like, I'll start from the very basics. How does Bitcoin work? And eventually, it was this really technical math question, and it centers around a mathematical object called an elliptic curve. Most of us don't spend too much time on mathematical objects, but a good example of a mathematical object is a group. And a group is just basically an abstract version of the things we normally do. Like when we are in grade school, we learn about the integers. The integers are a group. And the definition of a group or a field or a ring or whatever is beyond the scope of what we care about right now. But studying the elliptic curve or elliptic curves and learning that they are the main protection of Bitcoin. Some people don't know this. They think it's SHA-256, which is a hashing function that is used in Bitcoin. But the main sort of like Achilles heel, or like the main fortress, depending on how you look at it, of Bitcoin is this elliptic curve. Now, what is an elliptic curve? It's just a function. In this case, it's y squared. Pretty easy, right? We all went to grade school. Y squared equals x cubed, still very easy, plus 7. That's it. Now, there's more details than that, but that is the basic idea. And if you draw this at least on the real numbers, you get a nice little ellipse. Depending on what it looks like, you can get this. It's kind of a more funky shape than that, but that's sort of where it comes from in terms of elliptic curve. It's actually not an ellipse, to be fair, but that's the idea. So this mathematical object has interesting properties. It's a one-way function. So you can put an input in really easily and get this really elaborate output, but the output does not tell you what the input was. It's very hard to go from one to the other. It's very easy to go from one to the other. So that's why Bitcoin is very hard to crack. I can't take your Bitcoin. I can't take Satoshi's Bitcoin. In fact, I can't take anybody's Bitcoin, unfortunately. Even if I had 10 million NVIDIAs, I still couldn't do it. So I spent a lot of time working on this mathematical problem, principally because it's fairly interesting. I learned a lot of math through it. I never had the fantasy that I'd figure it out, but I played with it just as a tool to learn my own, learn math. And over time, I became more, facile at math and computer programming, which was fun. So I gained some muscles from it. I married a young lady who works at OpenAI, and she's a math and computer expert herself. And we spent some time on it, and AI matured a little bit. And one of the interesting things about AI is that it seems to be getting better and better at mathematics, which is surprising because it's such a hard subject, and it's kind of the height of intellectual achievement, in my opinion. Like Fermat's theorem took 400 years of mathematical development to be solved. Riemann and the zeta conjecture still are not solved. That's been a few hundred years, and they may never be solved. We don't know. So these math puzzles last for years and years and years, and sometimes decades or centuries even, sometimes millennia. And to me, that's really cool. But AI is very smart too. And AI is moving to be smarter and smarter and smarter all the time. So could we somehow use AI to make progress in math? And I think I'm not the only one who has this idea. 𝗏𝗏 has his little math AI startup. He was actually a mathematician at Stanford. OpenAI, of course, is working on some of this. Even Google's DeepMind has an attempt to solve one of the most prestigious math problems are the Clay millennial problems, where Clay put some benefactor, he put $1 million reward on each problem. Elliptic curves are not part of the Clay millennia prize. In fact, elliptic curves, I would say, are the $1 trillion prize. So Satoshi's money is guarded by the elliptic curves. So the question is, will we see an analytical solution, which is just a math solution, to the elliptic curve problem? And most people think the answer is no. I actually do think the answer is yes. I think that there is an analytical solution that is very easy to do. We just don't know how to do it. And we may not know for hundreds of years. But instead of hundreds of years of humans sitting down learning math, it could be a machine that does it with humans or without or whatever. So I don't know when that'll happen, but I'm fairly certain that within a few centuries or something, hopefully within 6 months, but unlikely, that you could actually just say, oh, your Bitcoin key, your public key is this, then your private key is that. And your private key is this, your public key is that. That takes 1 second on any machine. But the reverse is the hard part. And the reverse is basically thought to be impossible. So maybe it'll be possible, we'll see. Now, the way you would do it is called Pollard's Row. And Pollard's Row is an interesting algorithm that does find you this answer. And it guarantees, in fact, that it'll find you the answer in around square root of n operations. Now, square root, again, simple math from high school. N is very, very big in Bitcoin. It's 2 to the 256th power. So square root of that is 2 to the 128th power, which there are not enough NVIDIAs in the world that could do that. But my research has shown that it's not that far off. It's still, you know, what most people would say too far off to even think about. But if you do the math very carefully and you assume there are some mathematical successes, not breakthroughs, mind you, but just incremental improvements, maybe it's possible with Moore's law in around 10 years of progress, you may be able to see an analytical solution plus like a very high throughput computer solution, maybe. Now, before then, what most people think is going to happen is a quantum computer will be able to break what specifically is SecP 256K1, which will start to get a little more technical here because it matters when it comes to BTQ and Bitcoin and all this. So SecP 256K1 is pretty simple. It's the elliptic curve specifically that protects Bitcoin. The P stands for prime, 256 stands for 256 bits. The K stands for Koblitz. It's a Koblitz curve. Koblitz helped invent elliptic curves. And that's it. It's the SecP 256K1 curve. And it is the curve that protects Bitcoin and Ethereum, actually. And Satoshi didn't pick this curve too deliberately. It seemed like almost like a random choice. And I think the big mistake Satoshi made was picking a 256-bit curve when he could have picked a 512-bit curve, and there'd be no possibility of an analytic solution. But by picking 256, I don't think he realized just how fast computers would get in 2008, where they'd be in 2025 or 2030. So I do think Bitcoin's vulnerable from just a pure classical analytical perspective. But of course, Bitcoin's also vulnerable from a quantum perspective. And say what you want about quantum, no matter what you think about quantum, you have to concede, even if you're the biggest bear in the world, you have to conceive at some point there will be a quantum computer that can run Shor's algorithm. I think it's hard. I've not really met anybody who's credible in saying that it'll never happen. You could argue it's 30 years away. You could argue it's 50 years away. And those are probably aggressively long timelines, but you can't argue it's never going to happen. And if Bitcoin is supposed to be what it's cracked up to be, it's supposed to be this hard money that lasts forever. It's like gold, right? And if that's true, well, 50 years from now, I don't know if I'm going to be alive, hopefully, but somebody will be. And if it's still worth trillions, well, it's a big problem 50 years from now. Now, if it's 30 years from now, I'm pretty sure I'll be alive. And if it's 10 years from now, or if you listen to IonQ, it's 1 year from now. I don't think anyone believes that one. Then, you know, Bitcoin's really cooked. And markets, you know, as we all know, they kind of discount the future very quickly and easily. So the Bitcoin price has not dropped. So Bitcoin market is telling you it's not coming anytime soon. Bitcoin doesn't seem to be worried about quantum. So what can quantum do, and when will it hurt Bitcoin? Well, there's a lot to this, but the long story short is that you need, I don't know, at least, oh geez, let me get the math right. You need a lot of qubits to run Shor's algorithm exactly on Bitcoin. I want to say that it's 3n cubed, which is fairly big number indeed. It's 2 million qubits. It probably can be done with less, but regardless, if that's the number, or even if it's, again, could be wrong. Let's say it's 1,000 qubits. We're very, very far away from that. We don't even really have one logical qubit, but maybe we can get it done in 5 or 10 years. So what happens? Well, for Bitcoin, at the very least, I think that you can fork it. That's the good thing about software and the bad thing about software. The problem with forking it is 2 really big problems. The first is no one wants to do it. The Bitcoin community hates, the idea of forking anything. It's kind of like a really, really big thing. We want to keep it the way it is. Despite that, there have been a bunch of upgrades to Bitcoin. There have been like 6 of them. And, they've taken just fine. So I do think we can add a 7th. I don't think it's the end of the world. It's an upgrade that has to happen. And I think despite the hatred for changing the core code of Bitcoin, if they are forced to upgrade it, I think they'll upgrade it. And I think that the second problem, after getting over that inertia, is kind of this problem where, what do you do with tokens that are now quantum vulnerable? So if you say, okay, I have a new protocol, move your tokens to a new protocol and they'll be safe. Cool. Binance will do that. Robinhood will do that. Maybe you'll do that. Maybe I'll do that. But what do you do about Satoshi, who most people think is dead? What do you do about his coins? Well, if you just leave them be, the first guy with a quantum computer grabs them and says, cool, those are mine now, and I'm going to move them to quantum where they're safely mine now. And you really can't do anything about it, because once the quantum computer's out, everyone's private key is public. And that's terrible, because that means the whole system's flawed, it's worthless, nobody would use it. So you got to move everyone off. But if you stop the ability for old keys and old wallets and old addresses to move their tokens after a certain date, because let's say the quantum computer comes out and I take Satoshi's keys and I move it over, well, every Bitcoin that hasn't been moved over will effectively be stolen. And that's not something anybody wants. It would really hurt the value of Bitcoin. So you basically, the only way you could do this is you say there's a drop dead date. And folks have done this with the euro. There are many countries that said you have to exchange your predecessor currency for the euro by this date. And some countries said they'll do it forever, and other countries said no, by 2022 or 2002, all Deutschmark are zeroed out unless you change them, or whatever country did whatever policy. So I think that has to happen. And the problem with that is it'll work, but it'll only work for 20 years or whenever the next vulnerability is. So you have this super hard money. It turns out it wasn't that hard. And even gold, right, had in the 70s with Bretton Woods, gold was illegal to own as an American. So, money is not always so perfect. And Bitcoin's several flaws here kind of demonstrate that. So in terms of moving to quantum security, I don't think you need BTQ. So here comes BTQ. It's a company that has put, let me just get this straight here, the whole company, since they started the company, $41 million has gone into it. The company, has spent, I think since it existed, maybe $5 million in R&D, maybe. So
that number is probably stale.
Maybe 10.
I know. Well, yeah, looping back to your points, just so I can comment on it real quick.
Yeah. Couldn't
agree more with kind of how you've laid that out. I think part of what I wanted to relay as it relates to BTQ vis-a-vis, the Rigetti's, INQs, et cetera of the world is...
Well, I don't compare them against anybody else, right? I mean, that's not my job.
Right. And I know. This might be more for others who are comparing them. Less so.
Well, I wouldn't encourage them to compare it either. It's just a company, right? Our job's to our job's to value the company. What does the company
Trump
have?
news alert: Putin Trump summit
It has nothing to do with
after Russia rejects
𝗍 or anybody else. Looking at 2024, they spent around $2.5 million on R&D.
That's right.
And I run a little software company, and I think we spent as much. And it's on different stuff, of course, but you can't do too much with a few $1 million. And it's pretty hard to create $1 billion company with a few $1 million. of work. And, you know, I'm familiar with like post-quantum cryptography, for example. And obviously these guys aren't making a quantum computer. They're not telling you they're making a quantum computer. It has nothing to do with that. But if the idea is that these guys are going to help other companies transition to PQC, well, that to me isn't really a business. That's a one-time consulting fee. That's not really something that many people need to, you know, hire anybody for, quite frankly. But if you are going to hire somebody, I think you go to Accenture or, you know, Cloudflare or IBM.
Yeah, just to add clarity to that, it's less so on a advisory basis. So at least on, as it relates to stablecoins, for example, that would be more on a transaction basis.
Okay.
So think basis points on that.
Well,
as it relates to defense applications.
Well, let's go
integration with specific, you know, hardware and chips that they've developed.
Well, let's go. Well, let's try to go one by one. So on stablecoin, everyone wants to build a stablecoin. I don't think they're going to be able to build a stablecoin business. It's not easy.
They're not building the stablecoin. But yeah, continue.
What are they going to do?
They're providing the settlement network, which would be quantum proofed.
Okay. So, like, to me, quantum proof, quote unquote, technology is widely and freely available, and like thousands of companies have used it, right? Like, nobody needs them to do anything. And then making new crypto, to me, that sounds really bearish. Like, it's very hard to make new crypto. And Tether and USDC Circle, they can do quantum algorithms. I mean, it's not too much work. I think maybe they're one of the ways they've had a successful stock price, obviously no business yet, because you could help people PQC today. So I don't see why they don't have revenue now and what's going to change, because PQC has been around a while. Like, there's been a ton of work for that. So, like, to me, these are just a bunch of startup ideas. Like, it's not worth $1 billion. Like, if somebody came to me and said, Martin, I want to make a stablecoin network, I say, cool, man, you're doing a pre-seed, you don't have much work yet done, a couple million maybe you spent, maybe you're doing a seed. What's the valuation? If they said if they said $1 billion, I would slap them in the face. If they said 10 million, 20 million, I'd say, okay, I'll kick in $1 million. But, like, this is a company valued at a price that's, you know, not a seed round. It's valued at a Series A round, Series B round. And, you know, it doesn't strike me that this is proprietary technology that's useful, because the point of Kyber dilithium and post-quantum, you know, kind of algorithms is that they're open source and that they're available to anybody and they should be easy to implement. And I think that the packages that are out there have made that happen. And you don't need, the whole point is that you don't need new hardware, that everything's, you know, going from RSA to Kyber is like, you know, just switching some code around. But again, I'm very open-minded. You know the story better than I do.
I actually like a lot of what you're saying, because to me, you've actually listed a lot of the call optionality to the story. Where I have focused a lot of my attention, quite frankly, on this story is tied to work that they're doing on the defense side. So they are in discussions with I'll just say a large defense contractor in the UAE. And, you know, that revenue itself, I think, should we see it in the next 6 to 12 months start coming in, I think it might actually change your viewpoint on the story. So
what technology do they have that's useful?
Right. So it's basically, without getting into too much detail, because I'd like them to on their end. I know that they're waiting to. But the technology itself is essentially prevents any sort of hacking threat into the defense systems, like critical defense systems. And so a lot of the new age defense systems that the UAE is spending on, they're trying to proactively think ahead and have that technology embedded within.
It sounds a little vague to me. I mean, there's a lot do it. I don't really hear how they could spend a few $1,000,000 and have something anybody wants. Like usually you have to have like this.
No, this will definitely take more capital, but it's not a immediate sort of capital infusion. Like they have raised a few times, they have enough capital on hand to start delivering kind of early orders, and then from there, the plan will definitely be to raise additional capital.
How much cash do they? How much cash do they have now?
They should have about 40 million. 40 million plus.
Do they do a placement or something?
Yeah, that's right.
I see they have 10 on the last December 24. So they raised 30 or 40 or 50.
Yeah, that's correct. There was two other placements since then.
Do you know how many people work there?
Yeah, so the team at BTQ, which why I like it much more than the other PQC kind of small names out there, it's about like 30 to 40 people large right now, which, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, from my understanding, that is actually a pretty decently sized team.
I don't know, for a publicly traded company, that's about
not from the standpoint of a publicly traded company, but from the standpoint of people that are actually, focused on quantum, and actually have expertise in quantum.
This isn't really quantum.
So there are quantum aspects to it, so I just didn't feel the need to get into, but happy to. So they have a stake in a neutral called 𝗕𝗂𝗵𝗄 out of France called 𝗕𝗂𝗄𝗆, which they also have the ability to acquire in full, I believe by April, if I'm not mistaken, April of 26. And that company is working on quantum. And so they also have kind of brought in-house one of the thought leaders in neutral atom quantum computing, Dr. Brennan. Comes from Macquarie University over there. So they do have a lot of people that have quantum expertise, but I hear your point.
Yeah. So you're going to launch a stablecoin, or somebody's going to launch a stablecoin with them in partnership?
That has happened. That should kick off in November, I believe.
Do we know the name of this stablecoin?
We do know the I guess the owner of it, if you will. That's Donald. And then they are also working with Finger Technologies out of Korea. So those are the two Korean players that they've publicly come out and discussed working with. I think the stablecoin, if I'm not mistaken, should launch either mid-November or end of November, around that timeline. So call it the next month or two. Month and a half, rather.
Okay, so
that's on the stablecoin side.
So for a stablecoin, people really like stablecoins because you can send somebody money very easily, like USDC. If you have a wallet like Phantom or MetaMask or whatever, I could send you $5,000, really simple, no problems. Here, I guess, like I would have to, because this isn't over Ethereum, this isn't over one of the known crypto networks, like it's its own crypto network. So I would have to get this stablecoin somehow via other crypto, if that makes sense. Like all the other stablecoins run over a well-known network, like an Ethereum, mostly, but also a Solana. And because people use those things on Coinbase and Kraken, whatever, you can use the USDC or USDT. Most people use them to like trade between Ethereum, and then occasionally they use them to trade back to fiat. So like, if I have $1 million of crypto right now, why use this stablecoin?
No, it's a good point. I think it's the fact that Donald, at least in Korea, does have reach to millions of users across its various channels, whether that's e-commerce, gaming, retail, etc. So they're kind of enabling their embedded user base to transact in stablecoin. So, but I hear exactly what you're saying. It's not like it won't be a lift per se, but I think it is a unique approach. I'll give them that.
Yeah, I'd be prepared to pay for it if they launched it and got some AUM. You know, that's the hardest thing to do in crypto. Everyone wants to make a stablecoin. Everyone has different angles. Like some people want to make stablecoins by giving back the yield that the company keeps. Like Tether and Circle are really valuable because they keep the yield of the deposits. And
right.
You know, you keep the dollar, but you don't get the yield, which is basically the depreciation of the base. So, you know, it's kind of a, you know, there's a lot of people out there trying to make a stablecoin, but the key, I think, to most of these stablecoins is they run on a network that's well known. You know, anybody can start.
So yeah, so just to add clarity, it's not as if Donald is launching a new stablecoin. They already have one that is transacted on daily. Could come into play a lot sooner than a lot of people are thinking.
So let's just focus on that then. I think I have a PowerPoint of theirs, investor deck. We'll kind of look at that real quick. Accelerating quantum advantage is their kind of big headline. First company to achieve quantum advantage is what they said. That seems like a false statement. They also say outperform 𝗕𝗂𝗶𝗰𝗲 competitors with minimal funding. Okay, it seems again kind of a little rich, but I see quantum hardware, boson samplers. They misspell neutral atom quantum processor in this PowerPoint, but I assume they mean neutral here. And PQC secure chip elements, QSIM. Okay, so I'm just scanning through here. QSIM is the first crypto agile secure element. QSIM is quantum compute memory, security hardened processor designed to run any cryptographic algorithm using state-of-the-art chip designs. I'm not a hardware expert, but I do know a little bit about this. They show a QSIM test chip inside a 65 nanometer TSMC node. If you know much about chips, that's a very, 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 very old
right, yeah, older
technology.
Yep.
And they're talking about, you know, doing more there. They said their track record is they produced tens of millions of chips deployed within LG. They produced tens of millions of chips. Where the revenue for those chips were, or you know, maybe that there's more to that partnership than maybe it's not. It doesn't hit the income statement, but so QSIM is positioned to make any chip compatible with PQC. I guess one question is why do chips need to be compatible with PQC? But we can get to that in a second. You know, I can imagine there's some instances where, like, if you try to snoop memory or other things like that, like typical hacking approaches, you want it encrypted, and you would want it quantum encrypted, but like, still don't know why you need hardware for that. It would seem to me like the same way you would encrypt operations that are in like a secure compute environment, like an SCE, you would be able to do that same security with dilithium. You know, it's just a new algo, but it's the same idea of like, don't expose the internals. I know a little bit about programming, but not so much about this like low level, you know, really low level. I can ask some of my engineers here, but like, I think the general idea is you don't want to expose the contents of memory, that can include passwords or locations of troops or something like that, to an interloper, whether you capture the chip or you hack the chip. You don't want to be able to see what's actually inside the chip, and it could be all be encrypted, potentially, and not really readable without the decryption. I think that already exists. And moving that from like RSA or ECC to PQC, I wouldn't imagine it would be require like a new hardware. I think it would just be new software, but I don't know. I'll take a look at that. I mean, the last thing I'd just say is that, I feel like this is more of a business plan than a company. Like, obviously the two are not that distinguishable in the early stage, right? But like,
correct.
Having done a lot of startups myself, I get it. But I also don't start a startup and then tell people, like, I have a lot of revenue now at my startup, at least compared to BTQ. And I try not to ask for $1 billion valuation until I have, like 200 million in revenue, or 100 million in revenue, which I don't have quite yet. But to me, like, it just like, it's too early to merit this number. Like, I'm not saying that the world doesn't need PQC, or that everyone's going to do PQC with the button press and doesn't need BTQ. Some people are going to need help. Some people might even need hardware, to your point. But like, that's a business that's yet to exist and could exist at some point. But like, I'd rather invest in venture stage stuff that, the comparable of like $1 billion startups. Like, I have a list of $1 billion startups I could buy shares in. I'm happy to share it with you. And I would challenge you to say that this is the best opportunity out of, I can read you some of the companies real quick that are the same valuation.
Totally believe you, and I have a list as well. And trust me, I get where you're coming from.
Yeah, there's some decent opportunities. There's Docker.
Definitely some decent opportunities.
Quora is like the relatively well-known website that's around the same valuation. Like, there's companies that are, got a lot of revenue. Patreon is another one. It's kind of like an OnlyFans style company. There are businesses that, seem like they might have better prospects, or they've built like something of value that are worth less or just around the same amount as BTQ. So to me, like, if they can actually generate, 100 in revenue, absolutely it'd be worth $1 billion. But like, if you've done the startup thing like I have, getting from 0 to 1 is really hard.